The EPA is allowed to declare water a pollutant? Joining me now to discuss is Simon Rosenberg. He's president and founder of NDN, which is a think tank, an advocacy organization, also former campaign advisor to President Clinton. And Mark Thiessen, who's a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a former speechwriter for President George W. Bush. So it's all about the worms. Here's what I get. They don't like the excess water. That's posing problems, ginning up sediment. And so they can't take it up with God, you know, because he makes it rain when he wants to make it rain. And so the EPA is saying we're going to regulate it, and we're going to tell the local government that they need to, I guess, potentially get rid of homes, create these real restrictions on the homeowners about what they can and cannot do, try to contain water runoff in people's backyards. This is all according to a Washington Post article on this and to the lawsuit papers. And you tell me, Mark, whether this is an EPA gone wild.
Yeah, even Barack Obama can't regulate God. That's the lesson of this story. I mean, look, this is the flip side of the fiscal cliff. The fiscal cliff is about the miasma of government spending that we've had under Barack Obama, $6 billion added to the debt in one term. Now we've got a regulatory cliff. That is what we're doing with all that government, the new spending, which it buys a highly intrusive, increasingly intrusive government that wants to regulate every aspect of our lives. And so we've got the EPA here that's doing this when it comes to water. When it comes to air, we've got the cleanest air in 30 years. According to the EPA, they've got 6 new regulations planned for the coming year on air that are going to cost $138 billion in compliance cost of business, $500 billion in construction cost of business, and billions more in higher energy bills. You've got the Transportation Department, which is planning a whole host of new regulations that are going to raise the cost of cars and trucks. They want to force everybody to have a rear-facing camera inside their dashboard. So an American family that's struggling to make ends meet has to buy a rear-facing camera because the federal government says so. You've got all the regulations coming under Obamacare and all the rest. The fiscal cliff is a slow decline compared to the regulatory cliff that we're facing next year.
Simon, here's what got my attention, man. I don't really understand, you know, the water and the runoff, and I guess, okay, sediment.
Me neither, Megan.
Sediment, okay, it's bad for the worms, I guess, okay, that's fine. But here's what got my attention is that the Democratic-led Board of Supervisors joined with Ken Cuccinelli. I mean, the very conservative Attorney General of Virginia. I mean, that's a very strange pair of bedfellows to get together against the EPA. What do you make of it?
All politics are local, I guess, Megan. And listen, I am not an expert in worms and water in this, and so it's hard for me to.
But if you had to
judgment.
choose, would you go for the worms or would you go for the people?
But I do want to say that we actually, in preparing for the segment, I did a little bit of homework, and we were told by various lawyers involved in this is that there's no possibility of homes being removed in this process. So that's a little bit of an overstatement by Mr. Cuccinelli to sort of gin up the opposition to this effort. But clearly, the two sides are going to have to come together and work something out. I mean, Fairfax County is clearly unhappy with what the EPA is trying to do. I'm sure that they can sit down and work this out. But on the broader set of what Mark was saying about overweening, you know, this overly powerful government. Let's just be clear, right? I mean, the president has agreed to $1 trillion in domestic spending cuts. He's cut Medicare by $716 billion. He's proposing a massive tax cut for middle class people in the United States. That you sent me to prepare for this segment, most of the people quoted said that regulations and regulatory final rules have slowed way down under Obama in the last few years, and by historical comparison are about equal to what George Bush did in his first term. And so this notion that government is overreaching and it's getting into, as Mark said, to every aspect of your lives, give me strength. I mean, it's ridiculous based on the actual facts.
Simon's actually reaching out to him during the segment, which he's never done before. Mark, your thoughts?
Simon, well, first of all, Simon is confusing two things, which is the number of regulations and economically significant regulations, which Obama set a record on in his first 2 years in office of economically significant regulations that have a massive impact on business. But second of all, he's right. They did slow down in the last year. You know why? There was an election, and Barack Obama put off all of these massive regulations that are being planned, and now we've come to what Senator Rob Portman has called the regulatory cliff, where all of these regulations that have been pent up, multi-billion-dollar regulations that are going to cost American taxpayers more money, that are going to cost hundreds of thousands of jobs, these things are all coming to roost right now. And so we are in a situation where The regulatory machine is revving up, and Barack Obama is going to impose these 6 new regulations under the EPA alone. Just one of those, which is regulating particles in the air, 680,000 jobs are going to be lost if that regulation goes through. So this is very serious.
Can I hold you
to
that? Can I hold you to that? Let's come back in 6 months, a year, 18 months, and you prove those 680,000 jobs were lost because of a regulation that may or may not be promulgated, right? I mean, this is ridiculous scare. This is ridiculous scare tactics.
It's not scare tactics, Simon.
Many of these regulations are mandated by congressional law. And this just the basic argument behind this, that somehow this president wants big government in everybody's lives, is not borne out by the facts of his tenure in office, where we've seen domestic discretionary spending rise at a lower rate than
Dwight Eisenhower. I get it. Let me just give you this from the Washington Post piece. They say that they claim that if this EPA regulation goes into effect and stands, that if you build something like a home addition or a new residential development, that would require taking steps to retain all the stormwater runoff from the expanded area. So, I mean, think of yourself as a homeowner or as the county trying to decide whether to grant the permit about how, like, you're going to have to counter-program Mother Nature. Is it now my responsibility to retain the runoff of the water? Is it like the county's responsibility before they grant me the permit for the deck I want to build? We'll see how this works, and we'll see what happens in this lawsuit. But a good debate, as always, you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan.